Working with the CC Libraries panel in Photoshop. Accessing the CC Libraries panel in Photoshop for exporting assets. Learned how to work with the CC Libraries panel to create a library and export items into the library. Discover what can and cannot be exported to other Adobe desktop apps. In this segment, we will now start using Photoshop and the Creative Cloud Libraries panel to add assets to the new library. Later, if you want, you can use this library for another project or in another Adobe desktop app like Illustrator or InDesign. The workspace that I am using for this segment is the Essentials, as I want my Tools and Libraries panel visible, along with other panels that will assist me as I collect assets from a file. Some other panels found in the main menu under Window you should add for this lesson to create a custom workspace are Extensions Adobe Color Themes, the Styles panel, the Brushes panel, the Brushes Settings panel, the Character Styles panel, and the Paragraph Styles panels. Pause the video for a moment if you want to set that up. First, make sure that your file poster_cover.psd is open. You can find it in the cc_Photoshop project folder. Make sure to image duplicate a copy. Click OK. If you don't want to work with the original file. Using the Libraries panel, let's start by creating a new blank library. As you can see, I have a few libraries already created for other projects. In the drop-down menu, choose the plus symbol, Create New Library. By default, it will be called Library. However, it is always a good idea to give your library a new name so that you can determine which library you are working with, as you may have 20 or more libraries depending on how many projects you are currently working on. Call it Photoshop Assets 1, or a name that you can remember. And then click the Create button so that you can start working. Remember, if you make a mistake, go to the Panels menu and choose the option of Rename to change the name of the current library. This method is the same for all Libraries panels in the Adobe desktop apps discussed. So, in the following segments, we will skip over this creation step and assume that you have already created the library. We now have a blank library and we'll start adding the assets to it. If you're not sure what assets are, make sure to review the earlier segment in part 1, as this is important to all other parts and segments to come. Make sure that your Libraries panel is open. In the Tools panel, the Move tool is selected, and your Layers panel is visible to start moving several of the assets. You may need to drag your Libraries panel more to the center of your computer screen so that you can see what you are doing better. And shrink it a bit by dragging the lower handle so that you can see the button icons at the bottom of the panel. From the Layers panel, start by selecting the rounded rectangle 1 layer. Now click on the Add Content Plus button icon at the bottom of the Libraries panel to reveal options in the pop-up menu. Let's begin by looking at Color Assets. You will see several ways you can add assets. Let's do that one at a time. Some we will come back to shortly. The first is when you want to add a single swatch color. The rounded rectangle graphic on the layer contains a fill color of light blue. If I want to add that color as an asset, all I need to do is click that asset in the pop-up list and it will be added to the library and not the whole graphic. Hovering over an asset gives me some names and details, which may be important information to me if I plan to use this swatch in another project later. Likewise, I can add other color swatches in this manner. If a layer effect, like a stroke, has a color, I can add this as well to the Libraries panel. If a group folder is selected, the foreground color also appears as an option, and this is from the toolbars area. In my example, it is black, but on your computer it may be different. This is not the only way you can add colors to the Libraries panel. in the Tools panel, make sure that the Move tool is selected. Click on the Swatches panel to select a color, and then use the Move tool to drag a swatch into the library. The newly designed Swatches panel has additional color group folders you can look through and then drag more color swatch assets to your library. Now let's look at color theme assets. Another way to add color assets is to use your Adobe Color Themes panel. I talk about this option in detail in my video Introduction to Color Theory with Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator, but I will demonstrate here briefly how it relates to the Libraries panel. However, I would encourage you to watch that video for a more detailed look at what this panel can do. When you have used the Adobe Color Themes panel to create a group of 5 colors that you want to save as a theme to the Libraries panel, here's what to do next. At the bottom of the panel, where it says My Color Theme, rename the theme to an original name like Poster Project, and click the Save button. Now you need to locate the library you want to save the color theme to. That is why it is so important to give each library a unique name right away. If you don't see your library, you may need to create a new library or give it a moment to refresh if you recently renamed your library. I'm adding it to the current library. When done, click Save, and the Libraries panel will update adding your color themes asset. We will look at how to add colors to a project from a library in an upcoming segment. Now let's look at the gradient asset. There is another color collection asset you may have not considered, and that is gradients. Recently, Adobe Photoshop has made accessing gradients easier by adding its own Gradients panel and new gradient collections. Gradients can only be used in other Photoshop projects. Nevertheless, you can still add them to the Libraries panel should you want to share them with others. To add a gradient to the Libraries panel, go to the Gradients panel, and with the Move tool selected, as you did with the swatches earlier, mouse drag your gradient into the Libraries panel. Now the gradient is another collected asset. Next, let's look at the Layer Styles asset. Coming back to the selected layer, Rounded Rectangle 1, when I click on the Libraries panel Add Content button, I can choose to add a layer style that has the stroke, the gradient overlay, and drop shadow combined all at once into the library. A Photoshop layer style can only be used in Photoshop projects, but as mentioned, this is a way to share your layer style with others. Another way to add a layer style is to double-click on the effect in the layer to open the Layer Style dialog box. Click the New Style button if it is not already saved in the Styles panel, and then name the style Gradient Drop Shadow, and make sure that the Add to My Current Library checkbox is enabled, and click OK. Click OK to exit the New Style dialog box. This adds a layer style not only to the Styles panel, but also to the Libraries panel. Likewise, as you did with swatches and gradients, you can also use the Move tool to drag other pre-created styles from the updated Styles panel to the Libraries panel. Pause the video for a moment and try this yourself. Now we'll look at the Brushes asset. Before I talk about adding the graphic asset, I will just point out one more useful asset that you can add to your library to share with others, and that is Photoshop brushes. These brushes are not the same as vector brushes that we will look at in an upcoming segment, but brushes that can only be used in Photoshop projects. As you saw with the Styles panel, while you have the Move tool active in the Tools panel, now have the Brushes panel open, select a brush, and drag it into the library, and now the Brushes asset is added. Moving on to graphic assets. Graphic assets can be added in one of several ways. In Photoshop, graphics can be a layer or layer group folder. You can add a layer as a graphic by selecting the layer in the Layers panel with the Move tool selected, click on the Add Content pop-up button, and from the menu, choose Graphic. You can also add this same layer by dragging it over from the Layers panel into the Libraries panel. If you have a layer group folder, in my case rounded rectangles, in the Layers panel, try dragging it into the Libraries panel, and it will be added as a grouped graphic asset as well. Any group or layer, even if it is a Smart Object layer, as we will see in an upcoming segment, can be added to the Libraries panel. Moving on to character and paragraph style assets. If you select a text layer, example, the one starting with the words petrified wood, with the Move tool, in the Libraries panel, you are given some other Add Content options. Again, you can access the color, in this case the text color, and the foreground color, but you can also access any styling that was applied to the character. In this example, the first letter in the paragraph. Character styles for a single word or letter can be stored in the Character Styles panel. This is a good idea if you plan to use these styles in other Photoshop projects, because you can load these styles using the menu to access them from another Photoshop document. Then you can highlight some text with a Type tool and then apply that style as you can see here. Or, if you want, try highlighting some text in your own project and then add a new character style by clicking on the Create New Character Style button, and it will be added to the list. However, in some cases you might want to use the same style in another desktop app like Illustrator or InDesign. That is why you need the Libraries panel, because you just can't load this style into those programs any other way. Before you add the style into the Libraries panel, if you need to inspect the character style, make sure to first click on a non-text layer with the Move tool before you double-click on the style beside the name in the panel. Otherwise, you may accidentally apply it to the wrong lettering and edit the formatting by mistake. In this case, click Cancel to exit and return to the Petrified Wood layer. Click the Add Content pop-up menu. If you have not already, choose the character style. This will add the character style of that layer to the Libraries panel. And you can now use that style in Illustrator or InDesign for another project. Now, it would be nice if you could just as easily repeat these steps with the Paragraph Styles panel, but unfortunately in Photoshop you cannot. You can load or save paragraph styles from Photoshop to another Photoshop document using the Paragraph Styles panel option menu to load the style, just not via the CC Libraries. Even paragraph styles that come from Illustrator or InDesign will be grayed out and inaccessible. One way around this is to save as much of the style as you can as a character style. However, this does not keep the paragraph formatting, but you can still add it to the CC library. Later, after you apply the style as a character style in a program like Illustrator or InDesign, then you can adjust it and make it into a paragraph style instead. However, you may need to manually fix some formatting yourself, as some style options may have been lost. If the formatting is very critical, option 2 would be to add the text layer to the Libraries panel as a graphic asset. However, keep in mind that if you need to use this text in another program, for example like Illustrator, you will need to do additional steps. I'll show you what I mean. Let's go over to the Illustrator app for a moment. If you drag the graphic asset out of that library and place onto a blank Illustrator artboard, it is linked to the Creative Cloud libraries. In order to acquire most of the character and paragraph style options, you will have to embed the graphic using the Control panel. The Photoshop import options open. Normally doing this would flatten the layers into a single image to preserve the text appearance. However, there is a much better option here. Select the option Convert Layers to Objects. That will make the text editable where possible. Click OK. This might take a few moments. In most cases, this will copy over not only the character style, but the paragraph style as well, which I think is really awesome. We will look at embedding or unlinking a linked library graphic in more detail in the next segment and when exploring Illustrator segments. You can check out the file embedded_styles_character_paragraph.ai in the current project folder to see the result. Coming back to Photoshop, there are a few final areas in the Libraries panel that you can use to add assets. Now we'll look at pattern assets. In this example, I have turned off the layer 8931_graphic_image and turned on the layer pattern copy, which is a shape layer of a tree. Here's an interesting thing you can try with the Libraries panel. With the layer selected with the Move tool, now click on the Add Content pop-up menu and choose Create from Image to bring up the Create from Image dialog box, which is an option from Adobe Capture but is in the Photoshop application. The other Adobe panels I demonstrate in this video cannot do this, only the Photoshop one. You can spend a lot of time here, and I recommend you explore this area if you want to create additional patterns, shapes, which are also graphic assets, as well as color themes and gradient assets based on the layer or a graphic added. Pause the video for a moment here if you want to explore each tab. In this video, we are just going to look at the Patterns tab. Patterns can be used as backgrounds, as a fill or an adjustment layer, as we will see in the next segment, and are easy to create. Take a moment to try different pattern options, adjust the color mode, or scale or rotate the image to watch how it previews. When you are happy with the repeating pattern you like, click the Save to CC Libraries button. Might take a moment. Then click the Close button to exit and you are done. The pattern asset is now added as a PNG file to the Libraries panel, but not to the new Patterns panel. We will look at that in an upcoming segment. Finally, we'll look at how to create a new library from a Photoshop document. If you have a PSD file and do not want to spend a lot of time creating your library piece by piece, a faster way is to use the button next to the Create Group icon in the Libraries panel called New Library from Document. This allows you to quickly add many of the assets we talked about into our library. Your dialog box might look slightly different than mine, but you can enable or disable checkboxes on any assets that you do or do not want to include. Click the Create New Library button, and a new library is started for you based on the name of your file. In my case, poster_cover copy, which I could rename if I wanted to from the menu by choosing Rename from the panel's menu. And I can do that. I can add a 2 to that and click Rename. To finish off the segment, try grouping your assets in the new library. Instead of View by Type, choose View by Group. Currently the assets are ungrouped, as mentioned in an earlier segment. Create your own groups using the folder icon in the Libraries panel below, or Auto Group by clicking on the Auto Generate Groups for me. Here is the result of Auto Generate. My assets are now organized, or if I prefer, I can always return to View by Type. You've now seen how you can add assets to a Creative Cloud library using Photoshop. Close and save your file if you plan to review it after the video.